I was on a show called Married at First Sight, which is, it's reality television.
Yeah, yeah.
I was an expert on it. It wasn't me personally, doing my own life on camera, which I would never do. But so I left the show after 2 seasons, and I kept getting these messages, and it was the same word being used over and over again. I have 1,200 messages from fans who said, "Why did you leave? You're the most relatable expert."
Welcome to the Beyond Speaking podcast from Premier Speakers Bureau, featuring in-depth conversations with the world's most in-demand keynote speakers.
Hi, I'm Brian Lord, your host of the Beyond Speaking podcast. Our guest today is Rachel DeAlto, who is a communications expert. She's got a really interesting story of how she became a speaker. It is not a straight line. It's a lot of different stuff. She's great with leaders on how they can reconnect. We've had some tumultuous years here, and learning to have that connectivity, how to build our teams well, how to re-engage employees that have become unengaged in their work. So Rachel, thank you so much for coming on and being part of the Beyond Speaking podcast.
I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I know, it's great that you've been in Nashville for a few days. You got to come down south here to Franklin, to Cool Springs.
It's a welcome respite.
Yes. It's great to have you here. So can you tell us kind of your story? I know it's a little bit different, and it starts I know you have your sidewalk business and everything else, which I loved hearing about, but kind of what's your story of how you got from there to here within a 5-minute version?
I was going to say, we only have 20 minutes, and we won't go back to the 3rd grade for this one.
Okay.
But I guess the shorter version is I was an attorney and started practicing law. While I was practicing law, I came up with a concept for a startup. Thought I was going to practice law, run a startup, and then we actually ended up raising almost $2 million in equity. So I had to step back from law and be responsible for quite a large sum of money, and started running the startup. Got a ton of media traction. The startup failed miserably because it was just the wrong time, wrong place, wrong concept. But the media started coming to me and saying, "Come in and talk about it." And then they said, "Hey, you can talk. You talk pretty. Come back on." And so I started doing media, and then realized that there was this entire other world of coaching and speaking. And so I came in and out of speaking for probably the last 10 years, but really didn't think of it as a full-time profession until maybe 3-4 years ago, right when COVID hit.
Yeah.
This is
great time to start. Yeah.
I'm the queen of good timing, as we learned between the startup and the speaking. But did a ton of TV in between, was a relationship expert on Married at First Sight for a few seasons, did other expertise and other hosting for other shows, and just had this very bizarre, I call it a stew of experience. Yeah,
well, I mean, that's definitely kind of throwing in the fire, going from nothing to 2 million.
Yeah. And
then, leaving one career for another. I'm curious to know, what made you want to transition from one? Was it just, did you feel like you were being pulled, or how intentional was it?
Yeah, well, definitely going from law to startup was the scariest, because I felt like once I was in there, getting back into law, and I did joke around recently where I said, the lowest common denominator here is law. If everything else falls apart, I guess that's not the worst fallback, but
sure.
Still, there were so many decisions I've made since then that if a jury Googles me, they're like, "Wait, who is this person?"
Yeah.
But yeah, I just felt that pull, and I realized that if I was going to go and be successful at anything, you have to go all in. And that's always kind of been my mindset. If you want to make it happen, your energy has to be invested.
How does a lawyer become an expert on connectivity?
So it's interesting. Even I did go back and get a master's in psychology because I wanted to understand, and I wanted to have a little bit more of the educational credibility, because that's really important to me. And I love student loans. I'm a big fan. Want to write off forever. But even as an attorney, so I was a litigator. So I was fighting people from someone who hates conflict. And so my focus was always mediation.
Yeah.
I was a really great mediator. And so to me, I've always been doing this. It's always trying to get people to see each other's points of view. I think I've always been that person who tried to keep a perspective kind of above the fray and help when I can. Sometimes you can't.
Yeah.
There's definitely situations where I'm better over here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's always kind of been a part of it.
And I know you're talking a lot about now, your most requested topic, or one of the most, is leaders reconnecting with their people. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. And so it was born out of a lot of the things that I base my topics in, and just my expertise is in relatability. That's something I've been studying for the last 10 years. And so it started when I would go speak to a team And then I would hear from them, I'm so glad you're helping us to connect to each other, but you need to talk to them.
Sure.
I was like, who's that? Oh, them. They'd be the people in the back of the room that are kind of a little standoffish. And so I wanted to understand where that disconnect was coming from. And so I commissioned some proprietary research because I wanted to understand it just from my perspective. And I wanted to understand what teams are really looking for and really where leaders think they need to show up. And that's where that disconnect started to show to me, is that we actually agree on a lot of the principles of what people are looking for and what our teams need. We're just not doing it.
Yeah.
And so part of that is kind of that tough love moment of we have to do the work.
So let's say you've got a leader who's been bad at it, but they want to be good at it.
Yes.
What are kind of the steps that is it like, I'm going to go direct reports, I'm going to go to the person who opens up the building in the morning? Where do you start with that?
Yeah, and honestly, those are my favorite because those are the people who are willing to have a growth mindset
Yeah.
versus I've got this, we'll just work it out. I'll just hire new people.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? That costs a lot of money and you're wasting so many resources. So when I have people like that, I think you always start with what's on fire the hottest. And so as a leader, you look at where all of the holes are. You look at where all of the biggest complications are, where all the biggest problems, and where all of wherever that kind of the neck is stuck. And you want to make sure that you're focusing on the places that can make the most impact. Eventually, yes, I would love everything to be up and down the ladder, that leader appreciates, recognizes, respects, communicates with everyone that they touch. But I want to make sure that wherever we're bottlenecked gets the biggest focus.
Mm-hmm. When you go through that process, is there like this step and then the next step is the one that works the best? Like what are some of the success stories you've had after speaking with somebody or somebody that you've coached or led or spoken to?
Sure. I think a lot of times when I'm speaking, because my primary position is as a keynote speaker coming in and speaking to a leadership team or at an association speaking to leaders. And so my goal at that point is to get them to think about leadership differently. And so to me, it's not necessarily, if I'm doing a workshop or coaching or a masterclass, it's the tactics of like, okay, this is what we're doing this week. This is our focus. But when we're talking kind of those broader strokes and those bigger brushes, I really just want them to go back to their teams and think about how they're treating them. Mm-hmm. Because, I always call this the TJ Maxx story, mm-hmm. where I don't know if you've ever gone into a TJ Maxx or a Marshall's. I walk in there, listen, I love them, by the way, this is not derogatory, but I walk in there and I'm overwhelmed.
Yeah.
It is just like, and if I have no intention of what I'm doing when I go in there, I come out with a chair, some shampoo, maybe a pair of boots, because I have no intention. But if I go in there and I say, I'm looking for a blue shirt, all of a sudden I see all the blue shirts.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's really being intentional about your leadership. And so when they leave a keynote, I want them to have that intention of, what am I looking for? What am I paying attention to? What is that blue shirt? Mm-hmm. So that when I have every interaction, so when I see Brian, when I see, everyone else in the office, I think, oh, this is what I want to think about when I have that communication, when I'm building that connection.
Yeah, and that's one of those hard things. I mean, for some people, they got where they are as a leader because they had some particular skill. They're great with numbers, or they're great with this area. They're not great with being relatable. How can a leader become more relatable?
Yes, and it's that understanding that you can have so many skill sets that are phenomenal for C-suites, to lead the company in terms of profit margins and P&Ls and ROI and all the things that absolutely are the bottom line. Mm-hmm. But you're going to raise those and you're going to do it easier if you are paying attention to bringing people in. And I think that's the biggest thing of what I teach about with relatable leadership is really thinking about the other person and how they think about you more than you think about yourself. Mm-hmm. And so that's the biggest challenge I have, because I think as leadership, we think of ourselves up here as like the star on the tree, when it's really every branch matters and everything needs to work together if you want to have a beautiful tree. Yeah. You can be the brightest star, but if the tree's falling apart and turning brown like mine is.
I know we're recording this during like Christmas season right now, so the Christmas analogies are going to be in there. So these people are the tinsel right here, and these people are the lights, and you've got the star.
I was just going to make a joke. This is not evergreen. Like my tree. But that's just figurative. But figuratively, you have to make sure it all works together, and we're paying attention to all of the elements. Mm-hmm.
And I know you also speak not just to leaders, but to company-wide events.
Yes.
When you go to those, is your main focus on being relatable, or what really hooks in with those types of audiences?
It's still relatability is kind of my core, that's my core value and,
Yeah.
and really what I think I'm best at helping people with. And so for those elements, if it's an all hands meeting, or maybe it's middle managers that they're trying to work together and break down silos, it's all about relating to each other. And so really figuring out how to help them through that, how to build that trust, how to break down those walls. I was just with an all hands for a data and analytics team, and I went in there thinking, I was like, oh, they're not gonna laugh at my jokes. They're gonna be stone faced, and they were so willing to lean in to one another. And that's really the goal, is because you have these amazing minds, and I always say that I'm just the facilitator. The brains are in the room, and so how do we get those brains to connect to each other to again help our ROI?
Yeah, I wonder what it is. I guess, is there a greater focus on leaders getting to people re-engage, or is there an aspect about how people who they know they're unengaged right now to get back into it?
Those are the hard. The latter is definitely the harder. Is re-engaging a disengaged employee takes double the effort, but we can prevent it, and that's really, I think, what a lot of teams try to do, is to prevent it. It's like taking the vitamin versus the aspirin,
Yeah.
and so if you can take the vitamin and regularly take the vitamin, not like my husband who's like, I think I took one in March.
Yeah.
That's not gonna keep your immune system up. So it's the same thing when it comes to keeping your team engaged. It has to be a consistent effort. But there are ways to bring people back in. It's hard. And I think the challenge is that a lot of leaders, especially, they're overwhelmed. There's so much going on. There's so many distractions to where they could focus their attention that it almost feels like, why would I do the most difficult? However, the most difficult is actually the one that could result in the most damage or the most positive aspects. And so we have to be able to say, oh, that person. That's the one that I have to focus the most time on.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm curious to know, how did you get into, I know you talked a little bit about your story, but why do you think you are such an expert and so focused on relatability?
It's funny, it actually was given to me. It wasn't even a thought process. So I'm like, what year are we? I think there was a gap year in there. So for the past 14 years, I've been in the relationship space. But relatability really came up about 10 years ago, and I was on a show called Married at First Sight, which is, it's reality television.
Yeah, yeah.
I was an expert on it. It wasn't me personally, doing my own life on camera, which I would never do. But so I left the show after 2 seasons, and I kept getting these messages, and it was the same word being used over and over again. I have 1,200 messages from fans who said, why did you leave? You're the most relatable expert. And so I thought, why are you so drawn to me? Why? Because I'm a talking head on television. Why does this matter to you? And so that's where I really started to focus. I was like, oh, that's a thing.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of like the blue shirt at TJ Maxx.
Yeah.
I hear the word and I was like, that's $5. Because you just hear it so often. And I think we think about so many things around relatability, but oftentimes we don't think about how we can become truly more relatable.
And I'm curious to know, what was that aspect of the show? So I've not seen the show.
Yes.
I've got an idea from the title what it's about. What was it like being part of that?
It was wild. And it's one of those things, I think we all have things in our past, and I'm like, oh, we don't need to talk about that. But then I was like, but it's what created a platform for me to do what I do now. My first large speaking engagement was from people seeing the show and saying, oh, we want her. And then they bring me in to talk to 5,000 people.
Yeah.
And so, this is great. And so the show is quite literally people meet and marry at the altar. Legally binding marriages set up by experts. And so there's 3 experts, a pastor, a sociologist, and myself were the seasons that I was on. They've had different kind of in and outs of expertise.
Yeah.
And then what I loved about it, and the reason I agreed to it, is because I took it very seriously. I take marriage very seriously. And so I really wanted to help them. It's like, if we're going to do this concept, I want to help people. And I have a couple who are still together, 2 kids, happily married, and they're not the norm. Obviously, it's a television show at the end of the day, but I think it's in season 85 at this point.
Wow, that's crazy. So what do you draw from the most from your background of running a startup, being a lawyer, being on TV? What do you draw from the most when you go and speak to an audience?
think it's really the stew. I don't know that I could pinpoint. I think obviously the TV allows me to feel very comfortable on the stage, and I'm very grateful for that, because if you've ever been on a TV set, and I did live television for years before I did Married at First Sight, so I was on Today's Show and Fox and CNN. I did all of them probably 200 plus times.
Yeah.
And so if you've ever been on live television, live national television, you're like, people, like live people, we can work through whatever happens. Whatever comes out of my mouth is gonna be okay. So I think from a present standpoint, that was super helpful. But from a content standpoint, I think it really is everything. I think it's remembering experiences that I had as an attorney, staying humble, staying just always a student. Is more than anything. Is I joke about the degrees. If I won the lottery, I would probably go to med school.
Yeah.
I enjoy learning, and so for me, I'm like, it's that constant evolution.
So I guess last question here: what is if you were to boil it all down, what's the most, when you go to speak at an event, or maybe the after effects of it, what's the most rewarding thing that you take from it?
The messages after. It's not even the people. Listen, if people want to stand up when you end, that's awesome. Like it's a beautiful thing, but that's not how I gauge the impact. I want to hear from people afterwards. I want to hear. I have it's this dumb acronym, and I make a joke about it because I don't actually have an acronym for my work, and it's CACAI, because it's Connect, Communicate, Inspire. I get messages 5 years later from people that say, I still think about CACAI, which means they've absorbed something. And so if there's an impact made where I change the way people think, I win.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Great. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and being part of the Beyond Speaking podcast. If you are watching or listening, make sure to go to premierspeakers.com and look up Rachel DeAlto and for more information. And Rachel, thank you again so much for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for the Beyond Speaking podcast. To learn more about today's guest, visit premierspeakers.com. Make sure to subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen.